shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
Hi, I'm Larry Mulllins, 1010 Wins News anchor. Back in February, we did a very special Black History Month program right here in this studio, which reveals some American history which, frankly, we simply did not know about. Despite its significance, for some reason, it never appeared in the history books. Well, we decided to delve a little bit deeper, and now it has become a movement of inclusion, not so much to get rid of that which is already there, but to include the last part of a piece of history which led to a seismic shift in racial equality here in this country. So join us, watch this now, and you tell us if you think this living legend, which is right up the street from us, in fact, in the Bronx, should be a part of our history. Let's watch. Take us back to that day in March of 1955 when you got on that bus.
Well, I begin my story by, like all those stories, you say, once upon a time. Once upon a time, it was March the 2nd, 1955. As I recall, we got out of school early that afternoon, and because I live on the other side of town from my school, it was a special bus that picked us up and take, to and fro.
This was a city bus?
City bus, a city bus.
Okay.
We call it the special.
Okay.
But instead of waiting for the special, the teenagers, we decided we would just walk downtown and browse around.
Okay.
We walked downtown. Well, none of us had any money, so we saw Dexter and Bainbridge.
Okay.
That directly across the street from Dr. King's church. They made an extension, and it was called Highland Gardens bus. That's the name of the white people that lived in this lower economic development. So we boarded the bus at that time, and there wasn't too many people on the bus at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sit in the seat where we usually sit, the seats that was assigned for, at that time we were called colored, for colored people.
Okay. And educate us, before you go on, Ms. Colvin, was the bus equally divided?
No,
50-50?
it wasn't equally divided. It depended on what neighborhood you lived in, and whether you lived in if you lived in a predominantly black neighborhood.
Yes, ma'am.
You could sit all the way up until the front seat, two front seat and the two side seats
Of the colored section?
No, of the bus.
The bus period,
of
really?
The bus period.
Okay.
But you could not sit in those seats, You could not sit in those.
I got you. Okay.
But like I lived on King Hill, and we was going through a predominantly white neighborhood.
1010 Wins reached out to Montgomery, Alabama attorney Fred Gray to give us some insight about this neighborhood breakout and how it impacted you if you lived in certain communities and if you were of a certain skin pigmentation. Attorney Gray would go on to play an integral role in the civil rights movement.
They lived in a community in the northwest side of Montgomery. It was a relatively small African-American community. It was only about 3 or 4 streets, and they were only about 2 or 3 blocks long. And all those kids had to ride the public transportation system from their area that was called Kings Hill down to Montgomery, transfer, and go to Booker Washington High School, the black high school in Montgomery on the east side of town.
So you got on the bus and sat where you normally sit, and you've done this a million times. I mean, this wasn't the first time that you've ridden the bus.
Yeah, no, I sit anywhere, sit as far up as we could. And then as the bus proceeded on down Dexter Avenue, more white passengers got on the bus. So the bus was at full capacity, and then the bus driver, this white lady was, she wasn't an elderly white lady, she was a young white woman, was sitting standing near me. And in order for this white lady to sit, you had to vacate 4 seats.
Why? Was she that big? Why did she need 4 seats?
No, because oh, you made me laugh, please.
It's okay. We're at home. This is our house. You can laugh. Why did this woman need 4 seats, Miss C?
Because colored people wasn't allowed to sit opposite white people, across the aisle.
So the seats were 2 by 2, but if a white person sat in one of those seats, the whole bench had to be clear because you couldn't be across from them.
No, that's right. That's correct.
Could you all have made it through this neighborhood had that been going on, audience? I don't hear you. Okay, continue.
No, so
because you're edgy. Hey, I didn't know. Keep going.
And so the three students reluctantly got up and stood up, but I don't know.
One of you wasn't so reluctant, and
no,
let me guess, it was you.
It was me. And most people ask, why didn't you get up when the bus driver asked you to get up? I tell them I could not move because history had me glued to the seat. And they say, how is that? And I said, well, it felt like Sojourner Truth's hands were pushing me down on one shoulder, and Harriet Tubman's hands were pushing me down on the other shoulder.
Now, did you stop in this dream you had about Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman pushing you down and ask them were they going to help to pay your bail to get out of jail that day? You had to have known what was coming.
No, I didn't. As a teenager, I didn't know, and at that time, I had a teenager mind. Remember, the reason why I said that history had me glued to the seat because February was Negro History. At that time, it wasn't legally Negro History Month, it was a Negro History Week. But since we went to predominantly black school, and the faculty members had said that since we had been deliberately left out of American history, that they were going to have it for the whole month. They were going to celebrate for the whole month. And what we did, celebrated, we went to what we call a chapel program, like we had about an hour. And we have different teachers would have different discussions. Jackie Robinson breaking down the baseball barrier. And then we talked about Mary Anderson wasn't allowed to sing in Constitution.
So you had history even then going on all around you, and at the same time you didn't know it, but you were in the process of making history.
I didn't know it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was going to be I was going to be part of history, or that was going to be a movement. All I wanted is that bus audience to know that this colored girl was tired of Jim Crow and wasn't going to take anymore.
And you paid your money for that?
It's no secret, it wasn't the easiest lifestyle for African American people back in those times. Some have drawn parallels to today, but it was nothing like this. Can't ride on certain buses, can't sit in certain spaces on the bus when you were allowed, can't drink from certain water fountains. Things we all take for granted today were considered walking a thin line back then. Even something as simple as trying on a new pair of shoes.
Like in not being able to try on clothes in department stores, and not be able to drink out of the water fountain, only the one that was labeled color. That's why I said history had me glued to the seat. Plus everything that all these all these people that I learned about and that didn't know about. Like I didn't know about Frederick Douglass,
Yes, ma'am.
and we didn't know about W.E. Du Bois. We didn't know about a lot
you
of
didn't get all of that, yeah.
No, we didn't have that.
So you're glued to your seat from this
Right.
history.
Yes.
But the police came and unglued you
Yes.
and took you off
Right.
to jail,
Yes.
saying that, and this is what I read, that you were like a sailor. You could lay back and cuss. That you were fighting, that you were kicking and clawing, that you were abusing, and that they hauled you off to jail and charged you with everything from resisting arrest to beating up a cop to even wearing white shoes after Labor Day. I heard they went after it.
Well, they threw the book at me, all right. But number one, I wasn't cursing. Number two, I wasn't scratching, and I wasn't using profanity. None of those things.
Attorney Gray told us that Ms. Colvin, his client, was used like so many other African Americans during those turbulent times, that is, as an example.
She was not a delinquent. Matter of fact, she was an honest student. She was on her way from school. But what they were seeking to do was to enforce the segregation laws, which required the separation of the races on the buses, and gave the bus drivers police power to enforce her.
When they came on the bus, and they said, "Girl, why are you sitting there?" I said, "I paid my fare. It is my constitutional rights."
And how did that go, my dear?
And that didn't move. I said constitutional rights, and I don't know whatever happened. They one grabbed one arm, and I was manhandled. All the passengers say I was manhandled backwards off the bus because I refused to stand up. I refused to stand up.
Attorney Gray would later tell us that Claudette Colvin wasn't the only African American who suffered those indignities. He says, in fact, there were hundreds of them, but they did not want to rock the boat, that is, and risk being harassed by the system that was in place at the time. He recalls two in particular.
Joanne Robinson, an instructor at Alabama State, and she was an instructor when I was there as a student, that had a bad experience on a bus as far back in 1948. There was another man who had a similar experience on a bus in Montgomery who had been killed as a result of an altercation on the bus. So it was a problem that all the African American people in Montgomery realized it was a very, very serious problem that needed to be addressed.
You did something that nobody else had done. You got lawyered up, and you got a hold of a lawyer, and you decided, you know what? Enough of just this. I want to get a lawyer, and we're going to put this thing in court, and we're going to put an end to this segregation thing. And that's what made you different.
I got connected because at that my mom used to call her brother-in-law. No, is that right? Brother-in-law. C.J. Magnier. C.J. Magnier told my parents to contact E.D. Nixon. That's what, E.D. Nixon was like the Al Sharpton of today.
Okay, and we all know Al.
E.D. Nixon told my mom how to get in touch with an attorney. And then the attorney, that's how we got a lawyer. Okay. And then after I got started, then I got to know Mrs. Parks.
Okay.
And then we finally found out that they said, Rosa Parks. Well, then my mom realized that Rosa is the same Rosa Parks that was lived in Pine Level.
Wow. So the families knew each other.
Yeah. And then when I went there, when they introduced me to Mrs. Parks looked at me. She looked at me because at that time I was, I was a kind of a little lean, kind of slim teenager.
Well, you still are a lean, slim teenager. You just, and I'm 28, so hey, watch it. Okay.
No, anyway, Miss Parks, know what Miss Parks said, and She said, when I first heard the story, I have to tell you all this, she said, I thought that was some overgrown teenager that liked to sass white folks. But I didn't know that that you was intellectually mature enough to know your rights.
Wow. Wow.
That's what she said.
That night that you spent in jail, how long were you in jail and what was going through your mind? Were you scared to death?
Oh, Lord. Well, okay, I'm a teenager. I had a teenager mind. And the fear didn't come on, I tell this story, the fear didn't come on me well, when I was booked, they were saying, the policeman was saying a lot of obscene stuff, that they were going to send me to Ardmore prison. After they booked me, I got back in the car, and I said, what? This is, I don't think a juvenile detention center is here. So they was in this direction, because most of the places in the one little small town. Mm-hmm. So, but they took me to the city jail, and they adult jail. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when I tell the younger children, I say, if you ever saw an old Western movie where they put the bandits and the villains, and they lock them up, and you could hear that key go click. Mm-hmm. And I still can, if I give deep thought, I still can vividly hear that sound, that clink, because it wasn't remote like today. Yeah. It was a little key go click.
It had a distinctive sound to it.
Yes. And I got locked inside, and that's when the fear came over. I'm a Baptist. So I was saying the 23rd Psalm.
So you were praying.
Oh, yeah.
Did you think you were going to make it out of there? Do you think you were going to die?
No, I didn't think I was going to die. I thought I was going to get raped. So you know what I did? I had thought I was going to get raped. And I would look for a hairpin to stick in my hair. Uh-huh. So I said, I know I'm going to get raped, but I was going to put a print on this man. I would know what I was going to do when he finished raping. Like by the time I'm going to stick this in his ears. Mm-hmm. Stick this hairpin in his ear. But I was, that's what I was thinking. That's what was going on in my mind. But what he come back to do, it wasn't to rape me, it was to take my fingerprint. I was fingerprinted, so that's what it was, a relief, and they put me back. But I did not sleep. That one time I did not sleep. I just kept letting words go in my head, I started spelling everything that I could spell, doing anything that, I said, I'm not going to. No, I was afraid to fall asleep, because I didn't know what was going to happen to me after I was, locked in. When you're locked in, fear.
Yeah, you're locked in. Yeah.
Fear.
Let's hear from some members in our audience.
I know you said that the spirits gave you courage, and I thank God for that. But knowing that you could have been lynched, I guess I'm just trying to understand how you could be so courageous in such a world of danger at that time.
Oh, excuse me, I was a teenager. And I didn't think about the consequences of my action. What I wanted, those Highland Gardeners, I tell you, those passioners that was saying, oh, you got to move, you got to move. And I told you, all the children that was going to the school, they didn't get up and run or anything, because they knew what was going on in my mind. This wasn't no secret, because we had Negro History Month. Mm-hmm. We had this discussion. Different people did it, different instructors did it different ways, Right. We all knew what was going on. The adult people talk about all the grievances, and when they get a chance to do something, the fear come over them, and they wouldn't do anything.
She gave courage to adults, but she was right in what she was doing. You have to be sure you're right. Be sure you can listen to others. Be sure you get other people to work with you. And who knows, you just might be able to start a movement.
1010 Wins executive producer Sharon Barnes Waters spoke with Rev Jesse Jackson, who made it plain. He says 15-year-old Claudette Colvin was a teenager who was caught off guard and arrested. Rosa Parks, he says, on the other hand, had a mission. That is, to put Jim Crow laws in check.
Hers was planned. She planned to go to jail. It's not a matter of having tired feet and all that stereotype. She was a freedom fighter, willing to take to pay the price and take the risk, and she knew she would get out. Claudette Colvin was a young student who was 15 years old. She did not have the infrastructure. And of course, there was a community reaction to her breaking the silence on racial segregation, and she never got the recognition she deserved, but she laid the groundwork. Ms. Parks knew her and recognized her. Fred Gray, even to this day, as her lawyer, can tell you about it, but hers is a great story.
We received the impetus from Claudette Colvin. When I say we, I'm talking about Dr. King, I'm talking about Rosa Parks, I'm talking about Joanne Robinson. And we look back and say, if Claudette could do what she did without any encouragement and without any pardon, then certainly we could stay off of the buses until we could return on an integrated basis.
Do you mind sharing at least one memory you have with Dr. Martin Luther King?
I was invited to his house, not his house, Abernathy's house once. I shook Dr. King's hand, and Dr. King said, Claudette, you're a very brave girl.
Claudette Colvin's story was very intriguing and persuaded a lot of people to do a lot of things. In fact, it persuaded a presidential daughter to pen a children's book to talk about Miss Colvin's plight. The book is called She Persisted, and the author? Chelsea Clinton. And 1010 Wins was honored to bring the two women together right here in our studio.
As a 15-year-old riding a bus home from school in Montgomery, Alabama, Claudette Colvin was expected to give up her seat to a white woman just because she was African American. In her refusal to get up, she persisted in taking a stand for what's right, helping to inspire Rosa Parks to make the same choice 9 months later, an act many point to as starting the modern civil rights movement. I first learned of your story when I was in school. The junior high school that I went to in Little Rock, Horseman Junior High School, had been the historically all African-American high school that the Little Rock Nine came from. And Horseman was very kind of proud of its history in helping to desegregate the Little Rock school system and to kind of cement school desegregation, at least as a goal, kind of in America 60 years ago. And talking about kind of young people who had really been a huge part of the civil rights movement was something that I remember my teachers felt so strongly about. And it wasn't in any way disrespectful to Dr. King or Coretta Scott King or Rosa Parks, but it was more to say, you know, young people were a huge part of this, and young people can be a huge part of kind of continuing to fight for and stand up for what's right. And so that's how I first heard of Claudette Colvin's story. Goodness, I guess like 25 years ago, and when I decided to write She Persisted, I knew that I wanted to include her if she would agree, and I'm so grateful she did.
What you're about to hear is in no way, shape, or form designed to discount, discredit, to allay any kind of concerns or take away from that which was experienced by Miss Rosa Parks. That is not what we're here for today. Her sister is here. Okay, so along comes this museum in January, and your daughter, who visited the museum in September of 2016, went, looked, and noticed something was missing. And she picked up the phone and called Mama, you. What was that conversation about?
Well, actually, my daughter didn't realize what she was seeing. She just said, oh, I'm so excited, Auntie Claudette has been mentioned in the museum. And that was her first thought. And she took a screenshot of the plaque and she emailed it to me. And then when I opened it up and I saw that the museum, the wording that it was a test case, and in my mind, my head started spinning because it wasn't a test case. The case that they are referring to It's called the Browder versus Gale case, and I would please ask you to look that up. It's the Browder versus Gale case, and that included 4 women, Amelia Browder, Susie McDonald, Mary Louise Smith, and Claudette Colvin. And because Ms. Browder was the more prominent and the oldest, one of the oldest persons that was in the lawsuit, the case was named after her, for her name, and Gale was the mayor of Montgomery at that time. So it was called the Browder versus Gale case. And I just want to clarify a couple of things before I share my story with you, that when Fred Gray was
the attorney.
Her attorney that she was referred to at that time, he was fresh out of law school. And Claudette was his first case. He was 25. He knew he was in heads over water, and they had gone through several other cases, black ministers, other women, but during the time when, and I know it's hard for you to go back in time to 1955, but they were being threatened, there were church bombings, we were being terrorized. So a lot of people would not give consent to be a part of any case because they knew about the repercussions that might occur. These 4 women had the courage to stick it and stay with it and lend their name to this case. Rosa's case, when she was arrested 9 months after Claudette, was a misdemeanor. She was arrested for assault, almost, well, we would term it almost felony toward a police officer these days. So her case was considered a higher priority to challenge the segregation laws because she chose to fight. And those 4 other women cases were viewed as a stronger case. So when Attorney Gray screened all of the potential plaintiffs, Rosa was not a potential plaintiff because they felt that her case would take too long, and they had begun the bus boycott because of Claudette's and other women's arrest. So Joanne Robinson then went about her business of getting the bus boycott started while she was, and the other 4 women, they were working with the attorneys to get the case started. Fred Gray knew that he was out of his league. He then went to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in New York to solicit the help of Thurgood Marshall and Robert L. Carter. Thurgood Marshall went on to be a Supreme Court Justice. Right. And Robert Carter went on to prominence as a prominent attorney. But these men and Claudette testified before the Supreme Court. Now, Joe Biden said that when we got health care, that it was a big effing deal. This was a big effing deal in 1955 for black people, colored people, Negroes, to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. And they won successfully.
So let's break this down. And the understanding that I have of this was, as you state, Ms. Colvin actually sat on the bus. Well, there have been several before.
Thousands.
But the difference was a lawyer came into the picture here, okay?
Right.
9 months later, Rosa Parks sat on a bus. This started the litigation by which desegregation was ordered for the bus system in Montgomery. The big question that everybody's asking, Gloria, Ms. Colvin, why could she not become the face of the civil rights movement or the mother of the civil rights movement?
And it goes back to that young lady's case. There was a caste system, and there's a caste system in all societies. The darker you are, you can go to India, you can go to Haiti, you can go to any country, and the darker the natives are, the lower you are on the totem pole. Okay. That's true in every culture. Okay. And it was the same in our culture, and it was the same in white culture, the darker you were. And then Rosa had, she was more appealing, and she was going to be more acceptable to the white community.
Spell it out. She had longer
She had long
hair,
hair, and she was
light-skinned.
fair-skinned.
Okay.
She had good hair.
And she was also a secretary for the NAACP.
Secretary,
she was
and
a
she was
seasoned
groomed.
woman.
Let's just be clear.
Okay.
She was groomed for this. We had a place in Tennessee, right outside of Knoxville, called Highlander Center. That's where you went to be taught nonviolence, the technique of Gundy, and the technique of being a nonviolent protester. So Rosa was groomed for this. She was being taught by the best during that time. So she was groomed for this. And then about a couple of months after all of this happened to my sister, at 15, she became pregnant. And the stigma of being pregnant in 1955 was overwhelming. And the ministers and the leaders of that time felt that a 15-year-old and being pregnant
just didn't fit the bill.
It didn't fit the bill.
Okay.
And so they didn't want to use her.
But this was the problem, as we understand it. Rosa's case had gotten bogged down in state courts.
Right.
And it would have taken years to get to the point where it would even be considered by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right.
This was in motion.
This was in motion, and the people were now on the streets. They were now off the buses.
381 days, in
extended, and they were off the buses for 381 days. And everyone think they know and assume that the 381 days desegregated buses in Montgomery and the state of Alabama. That was not the case. White folks didn't care how long you sat out there until the law was changed.
Preach, Gloria.
And white folks had to remove those signs. That was their outrage, that they had to move the signs and sit beside a black person. We were known as colored during that time. That's when the laws changed throughout the United States. You got to keep in mind, it wasn't only on buses, but you couldn't get a taxi. You couldn't, we had porters, but you had a colored section on the train, colored section on the buses, and forget about airplanes. You could not buy an airplane ticket.
Wow.
So the Browder versus Gale case, when it was handed down, it impacted public transportation throughout the United States, and not just in the South.
Montgomery,
and not just in Montgomery, but all over the United States.
So let's cut to the chase.
Okay.
2 questions, one for you, one for you. How did you feel when all was said and done, and Rosa Parks received Congressional Medal of Honor, presidential honors, honors all over? In fact, when she passed away, she was, I think, the only African-American woman, the first, whose body lie in state in the rotunda at the Capitol. How did you feel about that? And then coming to you asking, why didn't somebody say something long time ago before you came to visit Larry Mulllins at 1010 Wins? And I'm being facetious. First of all, why?
Well, I can't answer that question, but I know how I felt. I felt disappointed because that they had left part of history out. And I felt disappointed because what made Dr. King receive the Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, was because of the success of the Montgomery bus boycott.
It was a domino effect, what you did.
And so he wouldn't have got the recognition he got if we had no one had not been for the Supreme Court decision. And why would you leave? Why would you leave out these 4 women who put their life on the line?
I applaud you in that you've not said, why would they leave me out? You're still thinking in terms of everybody, and I applaud that for you. You speak in terms of the 4 women, and I like that. Why didn't they come out before? You were telling me something, the families knew each other. You all knew Rosa Parks' family. Gloria, tell me about this, this thing that kept somebody in the family from coming forward.
Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of background of how we grew up. We grew up in the country. Claudette grew up in Pine Level, Alabama. Rosa Parks moved from Tuskegee at 2 years old, and she moved to Pine Level, Alabama, where she met my mom. My mom, our mom, was a kid in Pine Level, Alabama, and she would tell us stories later on when we were older about how she grew up with Rosa Parks, and she used to play with and play in Rosa's hair. When my mom passed, she wrote a letter, a sympathy letter to the family, but she took that time to recognize my great-grandfather again. So you got to think, what was all of this, the connections of between our two families going through her mind 9 months later, after finding out who she is, who her people were, and then now she just makes this decision to get up on the bus.
Somewhere in there, do we get the impression that Mama said, don't you say a thing negative about Rosa Parks, you just leave things as...
I'm old, so I'm like Claudette.
That's okay.
Some things, you know, you have to, it comes about with
That's okay.
just flashbacks and recall.
Did I follow you?
But you're following me.
Okay.
So, when Rosa did what she did 9 months after Claudette, my mom said, she has been chosen, the leaders have chosen her, and so we will never speak of this again. And we did not. This is the second time that I've actually told this story. I told it in Petersboro, New Hampshire last month because I was put under duress. I was called on the spot. But I shared that with Miss Barnes, and she thought it was something worthwhile that I should share again. But growing up, we were not allowed to speak about Rosa or about Claudette because we didn't want anyone to know. And it wasn't that we were ashamed of what she did, but this was the 50s and the 60s, and we did not want our home bombed. We were afraid, and we didn't want any trouble out of white people. So growing up, we were not allowed to talk about her case or knowing Rosa. And my mom said that nobody's going to believe that I grew up with Rosa Parks, and nobody's going to believe that we know Rosa. So just leave it alone. And she said, leave it alone. And so I have 8 sisters. We never shared this information, and we've got friends that are 20 and 30 years of our friendship that when they did find out was very upset with us because we weren't allowed to talk about it. And my mom told us, she said, as long as Rosa is alive, you will not tell anyone about, and she didn't want it to seem like we were taking anything away from Rosa and what the public knew about Rosa. And so we were not allowed to talk about it.
They didn't let me know when they were going to have these demonstrations. They didn't even let me know. I learned by, what is that man, news reporter in Birmingham?
Frank Sikora.
Frank Sikora, about the 25th anniversary. They didn't even let me know.
Did they tell you anything about the museum opening? Were you invited to the museum opening?
No.
The family, no one got any type of messages, hey, we're gonna, no. Have you contacted them and asked, hey, we're still here?
I have not, and one of the reasons why I have not contacted the Smithsonian is that I'm a nobody. I'm a family member. I'm going to be viewed as a disgruntled family member wanting 10 minutes of fame and looking for money. And that's not the case.
What do you want?
All we want is that the truth. We want, why does history fail to get it right? Why do the historians, the academics, the professors, the powers that be, what is it about the Browder versus Gale case and Claudette that bothers them so that they won't tell the truth about what really happened, and that you won't take anything away from the mother of the civil rights, but what is it about
that stops you from
including the facts?
They deserve to be recognized for the role, for the risk they took, and for the kind of gallant spirit they had in that season.
Had it not been for Claudette Colvin, Aurelia Browder, Susie McDonald and Mary Louise Smith, they may not have been a Thurgood Marshall, a Robert L. Carter, a Martin Luther King, a Fred Gray, or a Rosa Parks.
In fact, a group of 8th grade students wanted to know as well. Vicki Manolis is an 8th grade teacher who says her students had been studying about Claudette Colvin, but just like us, they didn't know that she lived just a few miles away up in the Bronx.
So I was driving to work one morning and I heard on 1010 Wins, which I listen to every morning, Miss Claudette Colvin's voice and an interview with her, and I just couldn't believe my luck, so I figured, let's have our students support this cause and get her this exhibit, or at least try to get her this exhibit at the museum. And when I introduced it to my colleagues, they totally jumped on the idea as well, and the children were super excited, and I think they just put so much effort into their letters, and everybody is just so excited about this cause and helping out, because we had spent, at this point, we were in the middle of her book, so they knew who Miss Colvin was, and then we finally got to the end of the book, we finished the book, and we wrote our letters, and they were just in that moment right then, and that's why they wanted to write and wanted to contact the museum and were so enthusiastic about it.
And talk about enthusiastic. There's Daniela, who says Miss Colvin inspired her from the start.
It's made me more grateful for the situation that I'm in, because no one's necessarily prepared to be pregnant at 15, and the fact that she still was a big part of the civil rights movement and that she refused to give up her seat. I think it took a lot of bravery to do that, and it inspires me to be more brave and like her.
8th grader Ram says it's not often that a character in a history book comes to life right before your eyes.
When my teachers brought up Claudette Colvin, I was surprised and shocked at the same time, because I never knew there was a 15-year-old that stood up on the bus, and she was forgotten in history just because she was pregnant at 15.
Hudson Cliffs is a pretty popular school among students and parents in the Washington Heights area. According to its online page, it has a pretty good academic record, and it shows in the confidence of students who now charge the history makers with getting the story of Claudette Colvin right.
Claudette Colvin took a big risk not giving her seat away and refusing to give her seat away at the age of 15, and just because she became pregnant at the age of 15 doesn't mean she can't be included.
Claudette Colvin should be included in the museum because, number one, she was 15 years old when she stood up on the bus. 2, she did something that many others did when they were older than her. And 3, just because she did something in her life that was a mistake doesn't mean she should be forgotten.
The entire 8th grade class, including Sophie Bloomstein, wrote more than 40 letters to the African American Museum in Washington, appealing to the head of the museum to consider giving Miss Colvin a more prominent place among the framers of civil rights.
Dear Miss Moresi, I believe the National Museum of African American History and Culture should include a display honoring Miss Colvin's work as a civil rights activist, because she is a very courageous woman who hasn't received the recognition she deserves. After Miss Colvin was arrested, her classmates shunned her and community leaders didn't appreciate her act of bravery. She wasn't given the recognition she deserved in other ways too. For example, on December 21st, 1956, the first day of integrated bus service in Montgomery, Dr. King and 4 other leaders took a symbolic bus ride. Surprisingly, Miss Colvin was not invited to join them for that historic first bus ride.
I'm happy to hear of the bus company's decision to comply with the Supreme Court's ruling. And I'm sure I voice the sentiment of the 50,000 Negroes of Montgomery who have been involved in the bus protests for, well, now 20 weeks.
Isn't it time for the public to learn about a woman who was only 15 years old at the time and yet was so brave and had such an impact? Isn't the National Museum of African American History and Culture the perfect place to honor Claudette Colvin, an unsung hero of the civil rights movement? Sincerely, Sophie Bloomstein.
And that's our story. Folks, Claudette Colvin is getting up in age, and her family would like to see nothing more than her name enshrined in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. That is her rightful place for her contributions. We reached out to the museum for response. So far, as of this presentation, we have not heard back.
1010 Wins supports the family's efforts, and we invite you to send cards and letters to the address listed on your screen, hoping that maybe all of us can help make a difference, and as we say in our business, update the story. Again, the idea isn't to take away from history, it's simply to include a very significant part which was left out. Thank you for watching. I'm Larry Mulllins.
I just want her to be recognized because she really, she did such an amazing thing, and people shunned her and they didn't appreciate her act of bravery, and I think it should finally be appreciated.